My Geeky Life.
Hi friends, and welcome to My Geeky Life. Apologies, I haven't put out much content recently. I wanted to put out some content for 40k because most of my content has been Magic recently, so had an idea a little while back about some 40k content for you guys. So what we're going to do today is like part one of a 3-part series on adding some narrative spice to your army. This is mostly going to be me reading from my notes, so bear with me if it doesn't come out very well. But yeah. So, whether you're a competitive or narrative gamer, coming up with a backstory and identity for your army can really add a lot of fun and immersion to your games of 40k. It can help you add characters to your collection and give you more meaning to your games as your army develops rivalries and alliances going forward, and characters and lowly troopers collect battle honours and scars along the way. Giving your army a narrative identity can be as simple as coming up with a name for either your force or for your commander, or as in-depth as creating a detailed backstory for your army. In this episode, we're going to look at 6 simple questions that are an easy way to create a fun backstory for your force and add a whole other level of immersion to your games of 40k. However, before we start asking the questions that will help you build your army's identity, it's always good to get an idea and do some research into the background of your faction to give yourself a better overview of what kind of units, tactics, strengths and weaknesses and lore GW already provide for your factions. This will give yourself some inspiration and ideas to create your backstory and help you come up with a narrative that fits into the current 40k universe. The best way to do this is to read your codex. Your codex will have the most comprehensive lore behind your faction's history. It will also have the history and rules of your army's sub-factions. If you want to go even more deeper into your faction's lore, there are a plethora of sources of stories, rules, miscellany out there for every 40k army. You might want to check out core rulebooks, older edition codexes, white dwarfs, black library books, 40k lore websites like Lexicanum, video games, etc. A good knowledge of your faction's background and identity can help you create a unique narrative for your army that has a solid basing in the 40k universe. Some people have a natural gift and will be able to read a few books and instantly create an interesting army backstory in their minds. Others may find it more difficult to know where to start. So I've put together a simple exercise that anyone can follow to flesh out a rich, detailed, 3-dimensional backstory for your army. So let's begin. In this exercise, we'll use the 6 classic question words: who, what, when, where, why, and how to create a narrative for your armies. The first questions we're going to ask is who, what, why, and how. These are the most important questions to ask when describing your army's identity and values. When and where will give your army a little more history and background, but aren't as narratively important as establishing a solid identity for your force. So let's go into it. Who? This is the first and easiest questions to answer when building identity. Your army needs a name. Sometimes this is a more formal regimental name that comes directly from your army's factions or sub-factions, for example the Cadian 409th Grenadiers. Or maybe they have given themselves a name that informs others of their heritage, like the Talith First and Last, or a name that strikes fear into the enemy, like the Humi Killers. Maybe their nickname is taken from their leader, like Rico's Roughnecks in Starship Troopers, or they may have been given a nickname by others and have taken it for their own. Even if your faction or sub-faction has a recognised given name like the Dark Angels or the Mordian Guard, your detachment or regiment can still have their unique nickname that can add flavour to your force. For example, the Kadachan 1054th Snake Eaters. If you can't think of a unique name off the top of your head, maybe do an internet search for real-life army nicknames for inspiration, or take inspiration from one of your games of 40k. If your Dark Angels regularly fight your friends' Tyranids, maybe they're the 5th Company Nid Hunters. In part 2, I'll go through how my Valhallan army, the Valhallan 117th Renko's Redemption, got its name and lore, so stay tuned for that. So now you started thinking about a name for your army, it's time to go into a little bit deeper into the who question to give them a background for their identity. So a few questions you might want to ask are, who do they fight for? Are they good? Are they evil? Or are they fighting for good and actually doing harm? So they might be fighting under some false pretenses. Do they pick their own fights, or are they just following orders? A lot of the time, army takes its identity from its leader, so you might want to think about who is the leader of your army. Does your army have a leader for a start? If they do, you'll have to think about coming up with a name for that leader and an identity. So are they old or young? Are they experienced at combat? Are they quite fresh and green? What battles do they like to take? Do they choose their own, or do they religiously follow orders? Are they more mercenary? Are they calculated in their battle plans, or are they more reckless? Does your leader lead from the front, or they're more sitting in the back lines? Do they care about their troops, or do they just see them as a means to an end? Are they a brave leader or cowardly? A lot of people always want to go for like the brave, brash leader type, but sometimes going against the norm can actually make an amazing narratives, and and can give the games a lot more character. They might want to survive every battle, so they keep themselves way away, or some might just want to go bullish straight in and die in turn 1, or become a casualty in turn 1. Does your army or your leader have a personal grievance against an enemy or even an ally, which might affect the way they fight with or against other factions? Do they have a notable war injury? Maybe they might be missing an arm, like Nelson, or do they carry a notable item with them, like a walking stick or a uniquely crafted weapon, or do they have a vice like a cigar or a mug of recaf? And then once you have your identity for your leader, you might want to think about, is your army's identity a direct reflection of that general, or does the general fulfill a more utilitarian role? Is every soldier in your army so well drilled that a leader is just a token position on the field and can be replaced quite easily? Are leaders in your army so short-lived that they change from battle to battle, and anyone occupying that position is of little notoriety, so they might not have a name, or their name might change from battle to battle? Or maybe it's an army of unscrupulous individuals that are always disposing of their leaders. Maybe you're the leader of your army in Games of 40k, or maybe your leader is represented by a particular model in your collection, and if that's the case, what happens if that model is slain? Just something to think about. Or maybe your army has no leader, and they're just a mindless band of thugs, or a chittering horde of aliens controlled by an intelligence unseen. These are just some of the fun questions you might want to ask to build up an idea of who your army and your leader are. So have a think about that, and we'll move on to the next questions, which are what and why. What and why are questions about your army's motivations. Some of the questions for what you might want to ask are, what are your army's goals? What is their mission? What do they fight for? Do they have personal goals, or do they fight for a greater good or bad? Are they fighting for glory, for money? Are they conquerors or liberators? Are they freedom fighters or terrorists? What makes your army tick? That's just some of the what questions, so now on to why. Why is a question about your army's history, and it goes hand in hand with who they are and what their values and goals are. Why we do things very much depends on our past experience. Why are your troops fighting for a particular cause? Were they born to it? Converted to it? Did they choose it? Or were they forced into it in the past? Why are they benevolent or malicious in their ways? Were they saved from death by others who support the same cause? Were they mistreated? Were they tortured? Were they wronged and are seeking vengeance? Or maybe they made a mistake and are seeking redemption? Why were they formed? Why are they fighting? All important questions to give context to your army's actions. Why is a great question to think about when building a rich backstory to your army, and it will probably take a little bit more time and thought to answer this question, but it will definitely help out with building the narrative for your army in the long run. So in how, we're probably going to touch on some of the themes that we've already touched on before and just embed them a little bit more into the story. So some of the questions you might want to ask for how are: how did your army achieve its goals? One of the most important questions. Do they go into battle head first, like berserkers, or are they more calculated? Do they try to minimise casualties, both their own and those of innocent bystanders? Are they humanitarians, or are they win at all costs, never mind the collateral damage, throwing troops into the meat grinder? How do other people see them? Are they misunderstood, or are they rightfully judged for good or for ill? Do they use a nuclear warhead to crack a walnut, or do they use surgical strikes to take out enemy assets? How might seem like a less important question than the other three, but actually answering the questions of how might help you develop a style of gameplay that fits your army's narrative and give you a bit more fun and hopefully make your games a bit more fun and involving. So that's the big 4 questions I wanted to cover today, and hopefully going through those questions will help you look at different ideas for adding like narrative and a backstory to your army. And yeah, building up a backstory and a narrative to your army can really add a little bit of extra spice to your games of 40k. And it can even give you a bit of direction of how you want your collection to go, what units you want to buy, what conversions you want to make, how you want your army to look. And also it can give you a bit more ideas how you want your games of 40k to play, what narrative you want to build in the games and what tactics you want to use. So it can just add a little bit more fun to your games and your hobby in general. So let's go on to the final couple of questions, which are when and where, and let's see how we can add even more depth to your army. So when and where, they might seem like more simple questions, but actually can be quite complicated thing to think about. So a couple of questions you might want to think about with where is, if it's planet bound, what type of planet is it? Maybe think about what colour the sky is, what the climate is. Does your army reside in urban areas, or are they more rural based? Are they part of the planet's governance, or are they fighting against the administration of that planet? Maybe you want to think about whether they are land based, sea based, or air based, or even underground. Do they have any special equipment they need to survive in their environment, like rebreathers, hover suits, camouflage, special weapons, maybe snowshoes, eye protection, all things like that you might want to have a think about, because that might determine what kind of conversions you want to make on your force. If they're spacefaring, do they have their own ship, or are they part of a fleet, or do they have their own fleet for that matter? Maybe they're being transported as part of another army. Maybe they're mercenaries being ferried about by their benefactor. Or maybe they're fighting for a rogue trader or an inquisition force. Do they travel en masse via the webway or some other alien technology? And then taking those questions into consideration, you might want to think about how they deploy to the battlefield. Do they use dropships, landers? Do their spaceships land entirely on the planet? Are they teleported maybe, land in spores? Maybe they have special space fall suits, so they go through the atmosphere on parachutes or some sort of rocket pack. And then you might want to think about how their equipment is deployed. Do they have any special equipment that reflects how they deploy? And does that in turn reflect their tactics and what battles they choose? So that's some of the questions you might want to think about where. So on to when. When is a tougher question to answer if you really want to answer it. The 40k timeline is quite extensive, and most 40k armies still exist in some form or other up to the most recent lore. So It might be a change in the most recent law that is most significant factor when it comes to deciding when your army is on the timeline. One of the most significant changes to the game was the adding of Primaris Marines. So if you do have a Primaris only army, it might place your army as one of the more newer armies. You might play, if you play 30k, you're pretty sure you know roundabout where you sit on the timeline. Most other races and factions have been around in some form or other throughout the 40k history. And even though some races were mainly discovered by humans deep in the 41st millennium, you can still create narratives for races like the Tyranids and Rekrons.
Rekrons?
To go back much earlier than that in discovery and justify them as just not being officially recorded at the time. One exception probably is the Tau, which is a much younger race in the lore. So something to bear in mind when creating history. The background of your army might be something you want to bear in mind when creating a history for your army, and if you want to answer that question of when. The best answer for most people will probably be just to give their army a narrative that ends in the present lore, so that any conflicts with up-to-date armies don't clash with your army's lore. But you might just want to skip this question altogether. It's up to you if you want to add this extra level of depth. So that's just a few questions that you might want to think about when creating a background for your army, if you want to create a background for your army. Personally, I find that part of the game quite fun, coming up with the backstories for my force and stuff like that, and it has helped me with direction for my hobby and what conversions I want to do for my army and what kind of tactics I want to play with on the field. So, and I'll go into that a bit more in part 2. And in part 3, what we're going to look at is how you can realise your army's background on the tabletop, how you can take that story that you created and manifest it on the tabletop. And sometimes you might have an idea for a cool conversion that actually affects the lore of your army. One of my inspirations was eBay. I saw someone on eBay posting a conversion of some old Yeti Warhammer models with Ripper guns for Ogryns. So I've recently just created my own Ogryn, Bullgryn conversions from the Yeti models that I call Snowgryns. And yeah, that's just adding those to the army, those wild animals, has sort of given me idea to add that to the narrative of the army and part of the narrative of my leader as well. So I will go through that more in part 2 and part 3. So thank you for watching. I'm really sorry it's a bit disjointed, the talking part of this video. I've half been reading it and half been making up in my head as I go. So it's really tough. I didn't realise how difficult that would be. And I'm not very good at reading out loud anyway. So what I'll do is I'll put a link to a document with all the questions I've gone through in this video in the description. So you can go through the exercise more thoroughly if you wanna go through that. And maybe if anyone wants to put their own questions to add a deeper narrative to your army in the comments, that would be great. I'd love to see those, and maybe it'll make me think a bit more about my army and what the answer to those questions are. So yeah, it'd be really great if people can contribute in that way. And yeah, I'll see you in the next video, and I'll post up part 2 to this video in a little while. So thanks again for joining. Please like, subscribe, and see you in the next episode.